Hello and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit of a different subject. It's quite important to me, I find it quite interesting, but I can probably understand why most of you wouldn't find it too interesting. What did the English landscape look like during the Middle Ages? So we're going to start things off here by just doing a quick little exercise for you. So, just got a quick question. If you had to describe the medieval landscape during the Middle Ages, how would you describe it? No. Dragons didn't exist. That one hasn't even been invented yet. Despite what Hollywood movies will tell you about the medieval landscape, the reality is rather different. Despite popular belief, the agricultural domestication of the modern world is actually not a modern invention. Sure, we have fancy motorised tractors and huge factories, but modern day England actually has less farmland than it did in the medieval ages. Well, to answer that, we actually need to move a little bit further back in time, to the Bronze Age. Now, agriculture had already been fairly prevalent in other areas in the world, such as Mesopotamia, located in the Middle East. In fact, some farmland has been going on since around 10,000 BC. However, around this time, Northern and Western Europe was simply too cold to be domesticating plant life and animals. The gradual warming after the end of the last ice age meant that humans were starting to travel up north and started to settle. Around 6,000 years ago in Britain, we start to see the first farming culture sprout up across the land, and this began the Neolithic period. It wasn't, however, until the Bronze Age, which started in Britain in around 2500 BC, that we start to see the first semi-permanent structures and farming communities. It's around this time that we start to see man constructing its first buildings with foundations, funerary monuments, and farms. Farming in the Bronze Age consisted mainly of two things, wheat and barley. But then, during the Iron Age, better tools became available, like steel axes, sickles. I don't have a sickle. And better storage containers. Cups. So, more than ever before, agriculture was able to expand. Over roughly 5,000 years of fine-tuning tools and techniques, the plethora of food and resources that these better farms gave allowed the population of England to boom and thrive into huge farming communities. Wow, I sound so Norfolk then. Huge. Sorry. Storing food was rather rare and, if it was possible, rather expensive. People would cover meat in salt to preserve it for longer. But in most cases, storing food was simply not an option for the common folk, so they had to keep lots and lots of food ongoing all the time, especially through the winter months. This meant that by around 1100 AD, during the feudal age, about 75% of England was used for domestic purposes. Let's break that down a bit. About 15% was domesticated woodland, used for things like lumber and hunting deer and boar. Trees would be purposely planted further apart from each other to give workers more space to go through the forest as they chopped down the trees, and it also gave less hiding spaces for things like boar and deer. Coppicing was also very popular during the Middle Ages, where you would chop a tree in a specific manner so you could manipulate how that tree would grow, meaning its lumber could be used for more useful things such as timber frames, woven fences, wattle and daub. Lindybeige, one of my all-time favourite YouTubers, has a really good video on the domestication of medieval woodland. I'll leave a link below. About 35% of all land was arable land, such as farms like wheat, barley, rye and oats. Unlike in modern times, where farms tend to be quite neat and square, the medieval farm usually was rectangular in design, because during this time, the medieval farmers would have scythes which they would walk in long, straight distances, mowing the weeds and reaping the crop, and they would have other people, mostly women, walking up behind them and picking up the crop and banding all together for the harvest. In fact, actually, the word acre comes from the medieval ages. It was supposed to be how much hay an average medieval farmer would be expected to cut during an average working day, which was roughly 66 foot by 660 foot, so a 1 to 10 scale. Horses were expensive during the medieval ages and usually reserved for the upper classes, so a lot of the farming and agriculture means was done by hand. In fact, you could actually earn a living just walking from farm to farm, offering your helping hand to work on the fields for the day in order to get a hot meal, some money, or just a place to sleep for the night. And then, roughly 25% of all land in England was made up of pasture for animals like pigs, cows, and chickens. It was actually fairly rare to eat chicken during the Middle Ages because the amount of food you'd get from cooking up and eating one would be really small in comparison to just keeping it alive and having the eggs that it produced. In fact, having chicken on the menu in your home would be a sign of high stature and class because it meant that you have so many chickens and so much money that you can slaughter one every now and then and it's not going to harm you. And then the remaining 25% of land in England was usually built up of particularly not useful land such as moorland, fens and marshes. However, this land was even useful for some things such as fishing or hunting or making rushes. Rushes being a plant that was a cheaper alternative to the candle at the time. In fact, Modern History TV has a really good video on testing out the effectiveness of using rushes instead of candles. Again, I left a link to his video below. Going on a bit of a tangent here, but life on the farms was not all hard work. Sure, being a farmer did consist of some very difficult times and hard manual labour, for example, the harvest or sowing new crops. However, this wasn't 365 days a year, and other than general upkeep, there would be entire months where farmers would put their feet up and not work. This is valuable time to them, and they would use this time wisely, spent with their families, teaching their kids, learning new skills of their own. It is well documented that medieval people, including peasants and farm workers, would go on holiday. Visiting family in other parts of the country or going on pilgrimage, a lot of households were just free to get up and explore. We even have evidence of medieval home insurance, where the owner of the home would go to the town guard and pay them some money to check over their property while they were away. The majority of Vikings were even farmers by trade, where they would go on raids when there was no farm work to do. So the idea of peasants trawling through mud day in, day out, 365 days a year it's a silly Hollywood trope. So there you go. That is what medieval England largely looked like. No, I said no dragons. And so the harnessing of crop and domesticated animals so early on in our medieval history meant that we could focus our times on a lot of other things like new innovations, new inventions, and war. Because why talk about medieval history if you're not going to talk about warfare? For now, thanks for watching.